The afternoon sun filtered through the sheer curtains of the modest apartment, casting gentle shadows across the hardwood floor. Marcus Williams stood in the doorway of the living room, watching his 3-year-old twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, play with their wooden blocks near the navy blue couch. The soft sound of their giggles filled the quiet space, a sound that had become both his greatest joy and his constant reminder of the weight on his shoulders. Marcus was 32 years old, with kind brown eyes that carried the weariness of a man who had aged beyond his years. 2 years ago, his world had changed forever when his wife Sarah passed away unexpectedly, leaving him to raise their twin girls alone. The grief had been overwhelming, but the girls needed him, and somehow, day by day, he had found the strength to keep going. The small apartment they called home was modest but warm. The living room held their most treasured possessions: family photos on the mantel, Sarah's favorite throw pillow still resting on the corner of the couch, and the girls' toys scattered about in organized chaos. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and Marcus worked tirelessly to make it feel like home for Emma and Sophie. Working as a maintenance supervisor at a downtown office building, Marcus earned enough to cover their basic needs, but money was always tight. Childcare was expensive, and finding someone reliable to watch the girls during his long shifts had become an ongoing challenge. His mother helped when she could, but her own health issues made it difficult for her to keep up with 2 energetic toddlers. That morning, Marcus had received the call he'd been dreading. His current babysitter, Mrs. Henderson, could no longer help. Her husband's health was declining, and she needed to care for him full-time. Marcus understood completely, but it left him in a desperate situation. He couldn't afford to miss work, and finding quality childcare on short notice seemed impossible. As he watched Emma carefully stack blocks while Sophie knocked them down with delighted squeals, Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest. How was he going to manage this time? He had already used up his personal days, and his boss, while understanding, had made it clear that the department couldn't function without him much longer. The sound of the doorbell interrupted his worried thoughts. Marcus glanced at his watch, 3:30 in the afternoon, and wondered who could be visiting. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, he found a young woman standing in the hallway, her long brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans, a soft blue sweater, and comfortable sneakers. There was something immediately calming about her presence, a genuine warmth in her green eyes that put Marcus at ease. "Hi," she said with a friendly smile. "I'm Sarah. I heard through Mrs. Henderson that you might be looking for a babysitter. I live in the building next door, and I have experience with children." Marcus blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected help to literally knock on his door. "Oh," he said, stepping back slightly. Yes, actually, I am looking for someone. Please, come in." Sarah stepped into the apartment, and immediately, Emma and Sophie looked up from their blocks with curious expressions. Instead of the shyness they usually showed with strangers, both girls seemed drawn to this new person. "Hello there," Sarah said softly, crouching down to their level. "What are you building?" Emma, usually the more cautious of the twins, walked over and handed Sarah a wooden block. "Tower," she said simply. Sophie, not to be outdone, grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward their play area. "Big tower," she announced. Marcus watched in amazement as Sarah settled onto the floor with his daughters, helping them build their blocks while asking gentle questions about their creation. Within minutes, both girls were chattering away, something that usually took them much longer with new people. "They really seem to like you," Marcus observed, settling into the armchair nearby. Sarah looked up with a genuine smile. Children have a way of knowing when someone cares about them. These two are special. Over the next hour, Marcus found himself opening up to Sarah in a way he hadn't with anyone in months. She listened without judgment as he explained his situation: the long work hours, the financial pressures, the constant worry about whether he was doing enough for his daughters. Sarah asked thoughtful questions about the girls' routines, their favorite foods, their nap time schedules. "I work mostly evening shifts," Sarah explained when Marcus asked about her availability. "I could be here when you need to work, and I genuinely enjoy spending time with children." Emma and Sophie seemed like they could use some consistent care. The relief Marcus felt was overwhelming. Sarah's references checked out when he called them later that evening, and her asking rate was surprisingly reasonable, well within his modest budget. It felt almost too good to be true, but watching how naturally his daughters had taken to her, Marcus decided to trust his instincts. The following Monday, Sarah arrived promptly at 4 o'clock, just as Marcus was preparing to leave for his evening shift. She brought a small bag with art supplies and children's books, and the girls ran to greet her as if she were a favorite aunt returning from a long trip. "We'll be just fine," Sarah assured Marcus as he gathered his work keys and jacket. "Take your time, and don't worry about anything here." As the days turned into weeks, Marcus began to notice remarkable changes in his daughters. Emma, who had been increasingly clingy since her mother's death, started playing more independently. Sophie, always energetic but sometimes difficult to settle, began following a more structured routine. Both girls seemed happier, more secure. Sarah had a gift with children that went beyond simple babysitting. She read to them with different voices for each character, turning story time into magical adventures. She encouraged their creativity with art projects using supplies she seemed to have an endless source of. Most importantly, she listened to them with the kind of patience and attention that made each girl feel important and heard. Marcus found himself looking forward to coming home from work, not just to see his daughters, but to hear Sarah's gentle reports about their day. She remembered details that seemed small but meant everything to him: how Emma had finally tried the broccoli at dinner, how Sophie had drawn a picture of their family that included Sarah alongside Marcus and the twins. "You're amazing with them," Marcus told Sarah one evening as she prepared to leave. The girls were already in their pajamas, teeth brushed and ready for bedtime stories. "I don't know how you do it, but they're like different children." "Happier children," Sarah smiled, but Marcus noticed a flicker of something in her expression, perhaps sadness or uncertainty. "They just needed someone to really see them," she said softly. "Every child deserves that." There were moments when Marcus wondered about Sarah's life outside of their apartment. She never talked about her own family, and while she mentioned having evening work, she was always vague about the details. She dressed simply, but Marcus noticed that her clothes, while casual, seemed to be of unusually good quality. Her phone, when it occasionally rang during the evening, seemed to bring calls that made her step into the hallway to speak in hushed, businesslike tones. But these observations felt minor compared to the transformation he saw in his daughters. For the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt like he could breathe. The constant knot of anxiety in his chest had loosened. His daughters were thriving, and he was managing to excel at work without the constant distraction of worrying about childcare. One evening in late October, as autumn painted the city in shades of gold and red, Marcus came home to find Sarah sitting on the floor with the girls, helping them sort through a large box of books. The books were beautiful, hardcover editions with colorful illustrations, far nicer than anything in their modest collection. "Where did these come from?" Marcus asked, settling down beside them. Sarah looked up, and for a moment, she seemed uncertain how to respond. "I thought the girls might enjoy them," she said finally. "Reading is so important for their development." Emma was already absorbed in a book about a princess who built castles, while Sophie flipped through one about animals in the forest. They were clearly delighted with the new additions to their small library. "Sarah, these must have been expensive," Marcus said quietly. "You don't need to buy things for them. You're already doing so much." "It's not a problem," Sarah replied, but she avoided his eyes. "I want them to have nice things." That night, after Sarah had left and the girls were asleep, Marcus found himself thinking about the books, about Sarah's reluctance to discuss her own life, about the quality of her clothes and the mysterious evening phone calls. A small seed of concern began to grow in his mind, not about Sarah's care for his daughters, which was clearly genuine and loving, but about what she might not be telling him. The next week, Marcus's world shifted in a way he never could have anticipated. He was working late, performing maintenance checks on the executive floors of the downtown office building where he was employed, when he heard voices coming from the corner office. The light was on, which was unusual for that time of evening, and as Marcus approached to check if someone had forgotten to turn it off, he heard a familiar voice. It was Sarah's voice, but she was speaking with an authority and confidence he had never heard before. She was discussing quarterly reports, market projections, and strategic planning with the kind of expertise that spoke of years of experience in high-level business. Marcus peered carefully around the doorway and felt his world tilt on its axis. There was Sarah, dressed in an elegant business suit, her hair styled professionally, sitting behind the massive mahogany desk in the CEO's office. The nameplate on the desk read, "Sarah Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer." The woman who had been caring for his daughters, who had been sitting on his living room floor building block towers and reading bedtime stories, was the CEO of the company where he worked. She was Sarah Mitchell, the daughter of the company's founder, a woman whose business decisions affected thousands of employees, including himself. Marcus stood frozen in the hallway, his mind racing to process this revelation. Sarah Mitchell was known throughout the company as brilliant, dedicated, and intensely private. Rumors suggested that she had worked her way up from entry-level positions despite her family connections, that she had earned her position through talent and hard work rather than nepotism. She was respected by employees and feared by competitors. And she had been taking care of his children, sitting on his floor, reading them stories, helping them with their dinner, all while he paid her a modest hourly rate. That was probably less than she earned in minutes at her real job. The conversation in the office concluded, and Marcus quickly moved away, his heart pounding. He spent the rest of his shift trying to understand why Sarah had done this, what possible motivation she could have had for essentially working as his babysitter when she could afford to hire entire staffs of childcare professionals. When Marcus returned home that night, Sarah was just finishing cleaning up the kitchen while the girls slept peacefully in their room. She looked exactly as she always did, comfortable and casual, completely different from the polished executive he had seen hours earlier. "How was your evening?" Marcus asked, studying her face carefully. "Wonderful," Sarah replied with genuine warmth. "The girls and I made cookies, and Sophie only got flour on about half the kitchen." She laughed softly, gesturing to the spotless countertops. "I think I managed to clean up the evidence." Marcus felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Gratitude, confusion, embarrassment, and something that might have been betrayal all mixed together in his chest. "Sarah," he began, then stopped, unsure how to proceed. She looked at him with concern. "Is everything okay? You seem upset." For a long moment, Marcus considered pretending he hadn't seen her, continuing with the arrangement that had brought such stability and happiness to his daughters' lives. But he knew he couldn't live with the deception, even if it wasn't his own. "I saw you tonight," he said quietly. "At the office. I know who you are." Sarah's face went very still, and she sank slowly onto one of the kitchen chairs. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken questions and explanations. "I can explain," she said finally, her voice small and uncertain in a way Marcus had never heard before. "I hope so," Marcus replied, sitting down across from her. "Because I'm completely lost here, Sarah. Or should I say, Ms. Mitchell." Sarah's green eyes filled with tears, and she looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "Please," she said softly. "Just Sarah. Always just Sarah." Over the next hour, Sarah told Marcus a story he never could have imagined. She explained that she had grown up with every material advantage but had often felt isolated and alone. Her father, the company's founder, had been consumed with building his business empire, and her mother had been more interested in social obligations than in forming a real relationship with her daughter. Sarah had learned early that people were often interested in her wealth and status rather than in who she actually was. "When I took over as CEO 3 years ago," Sarah continued, "the isolation got worse. Everyone wanted something from me. Every relationship felt calculated, every friendship felt conditional. I started to wonder if anyone would ever just like me for who I am, not what I represent." She explained that she had been walking through Marcus's neighborhood one evening, trying to clear her head after a particularly difficult day at work, when she had encountered Mrs. Henderson at the corner market. The older woman had been worried about Marcus, talking to anyone who would listen about the struggles of the young father who was trying so hard to raise his daughters alone. "Something about the way she described you and the girls touched something in me," Sarah said, wiping away a tear. Here was this man who was dealing with real challenges, real grief, and he was focused entirely on taking care of his children. "It seemed so pure, so genuine, compared to everything else in my life." Sarah had initially planned to simply help anonymously, perhaps by arranging for professional childcare services to be provided at a reduced cost. But when she had knocked on Marcus's door that first day, something had changed. "The moment I met Emma and Sophie, I fell in love with them," she admitted. "And watching you with them, seeing how much you care, how hard you work to give them everything they need. I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to help, not as the CEO with money to throw at problems, but as just Sarah, someone who cares about you and your family." Marcus listened to her explanation, watching the genuine emotion in her face, hearing the sincerity in her voice. The anger and confusion he had felt began to give way to understanding, though questions remained. "But the deception, Sarah," he said gently. "For months, you've let me pay you, let me worry about money, when you could have solved every financial problem I have with what you probably spend on lunch." "I know," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. "And I've felt terrible about it. But I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, everything would change. You'd start seeing me differently, treating me differently. The girls might start seeing me as someone to ask for expensive things rather than someone who just loves spending time with them." She paused, looking up at Marcus with eyes that held both hope and fear. "These past few months with you and Emma and Sophie have been the happiest of my adult life. For the first time in years, I've felt like I belonged somewhere, like I was valued for what I could give emotionally rather than financially." Marcus found himself thinking about the past few months from Sarah's perspective. He remembered how naturally she had connected with his daughters, how she had never seemed to be working for the money but genuinely enjoying every moment with them. He thought about the art supplies she had brought, the books, the small gifts that had enhanced his daughters' lives but had never felt ostentatious or inappropriate. "What happens now?" he asked finally. Sarah's face crumpled with uncertainty. "I don't know," she admitted. I hope that maybe we can find a way to move forward. I understand if you can't trust me anymore, if you feel like I've been manipulating you. But please know that my feelings for you and the girls are completely real. You've become my family in a way that I never expected." Marcus looked at this woman who had brought such light into his daughters' lives, who had given him back his sense of stability and hope. He thought about Emma's laughter during Sarah's story times, about Sophie's excitement when Sarah arrived each evening. He thought about his own growing feelings for Sarah, feelings he had been hesitant to acknowledge even to himself. "Sarah," he said slowly, "I need some time to process all of this. It's a lot to take in." She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Of course. I understand completely. I can arrange for other childcare if you need me to step back." "No," Marcus said quickly, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "No, the girls need you. Whatever else is complicated about this situation, that much is clear. They love you, and you've been incredible with them." Over the following weeks, Marcus and Sarah began the delicate process of rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of honesty. Sarah was completely open about her life, her work, and her feelings. Marcus began to understand the loneliness that had driven her to seek connection in such an unconventional way. They established new boundaries and new understandings. Sarah continued to care for Emma and Sophie, but she and Marcus agreed on a more equitable arrangement. Sarah insisted on contributing more substantially to the household expenses, while Marcus insisted on maintaining his role as the girls' primary provider and decision-maker. More importantly, they began to explore the deeper connection that had been growing between them. Marcus found that knowing Sarah's true identity didn't change his feelings for her. If anything, her vulnerability and honesty in explaining her deception had deepened his respect for her character. On a snowy evening in December, as Marcus returned home from work, he found Sarah in the kitchen with Emma and Sophie, making hot chocolate and Christmas cookies. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so filled with warmth and love, that he felt his heart swell with gratitude for the unexpected gift that had entered their lives. "Daddy," Sophie ran to him, her face covered with flour and chocolate. "Sarah taught us to make snow cookies." Emma followed more sedately, but her smile was just as bright. "Look, Daddy," she said, holding up a slightly lopsided cookie shaped like a snowman. "I made this for you." As Marcus hugged his daughters and accepted their sweet, imper